You think humiliating a woman makes you powerful? The voice was low, steady, like thunder that hasn't broken yet. The milkshake was still dripping from Samantha's hair when the biggest man in the diner pushed back his chair and stood up. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody moved. Because Jack Reaper Cole wasn't the kind of man you laughed around twice. And Tyler Vaughn, with all his money, all his friends, all his arrogance, had just made the worst mistake of his 23 years on this earth. If this story hits you somewhere deep, subscribe, drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far this story travels. The coffee pot was almost empty when Samantha Reed decided she'd push through one more hour. That was the deal she made with herself every single night. One more hour, then another, then one more after that. She'd been making that deal for 11 months straight ever since her father's kidneys started failing, and the medical bills began arriving like bad weather, quiet at first, then all at once, then without stopping. She was 24 years old and she was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix anymore. The Diner Millie's roadside, just off Route 89 outside Flagstaff, Arizona, wasn't the kind of place people remembered on purpose. Truckers stopped there because the coffee was strong and the portions were honest. Local ranchers came in on Saturday mornings because Millie had been serving them the same breakfast for 30 years. The booths were cracked. The ceiling fan wobbled. The floor had a soft spot near the kitchen door that Samantha had learned to step around without thinking. She knew every inch of that place. She'd worked there since she was 19, first part-time, then full-time, then double shifts when everything with her dad got serious. Millie had never once asked her to explain herself. That kind of loyalty meant something. It meant Samantha showed up even when her feet ached so bad she had to soak them in Epsom salt before bed. It was a Thursday night in late October. The crowd was thinner than a weekend, but fuller than it had any right to be for almost 9 o'clock. A table of truckers sat near the window. An older couple in the corner shared a piece of pie without talking, the comfortable silence of people who'd been married long enough that they didn't need words anymore. A veteran in a faded army nursed his coffee at the counter, reading yesterday's paper because today's news wasn't any different anyway. And then there was the booth near the back window. The man sitting there had arrived somewhere around 8. He hadn't said much, ordered black coffee and the meatloaf special, thanked Samantha with a nod, and returned his attention to something in his own head. He was enormous, not in the showy way of men who spent money on gym memberships, but in the quiet, settled way of someone who'd been built by actual living. His leather vest was faded, the Hells Angels patch on the back worn soft from years of road and weather. His forearms were covered in tattoos, the kind that told stories if you knew how to read them. His name, though Samantha didn't know it yet, was Jack Cole. Most people who knew him called him Reaper. Most people who didn't know him gave him a wide berth on instinct. He sat alone. He watched the room the way men who'd survived dangerous places always watch rooms, not with suspicion exactly, but with a permanent quiet attention that never fully switched off. He was on his second cup of coffee when the door opened and the noise came in. 4 of them. Young. The kind of young that still believed loudness was the same thing as confidence. They were dressed in the effortless, expensive way, the kind of clothing that looked casual but cost more than Samantha made in 2 weeks. The one in front was Tyler Vaughn, though she didn't know his name either, not yet. He walked the way people walked when they were used to rooms rearranging themselves around them. His friends trailed behind him like planets orbiting a sun that had never once been told it wasn't the center of the universe. They took the big corner booth, the one Samantha had just finished cleaning without asking. One of them put his feet on the seat. Another knocked a menu off the table and didn't pick it up. Samantha took a breath. She picked up her order pad and walked over. "Evening," she said. "Welcome to Millie's. Can I start you all off with some drinks?" Tyler looked at her the way people sometimes looked at furniture. Long enough to process she was there. Not long enough to actually see her. "Coffee," he said, "and make sure it's actually hot this time. Last time I was somewhere like this, the coffee was basically warm water." "Haven't been here before," one of his friends pointed out. "Doesn't matter," Tyler said, not looking at him. Samantha wrote down coffee. She wrote down the rest of their orders. A burger. 2 more coffees, a milkshake for Tyler. Extra thick. He said it twice, and she went to the kitchen, and she did not let herself feel anything about the way he'd spoken to her. She'd had worse. Most nights had worse. You learn to let it slide off you like water off a flat rock. She brought the drinks. She brought the food. She refilled the trucker's coffees. She checked on the old couple and the veteran at the counter. She kept moving the way you did when standing still meant your body started reporting in with everything it was carrying. 40 minutes passed. The diner was settling into its late-night rhythm. The ceiling fan wobbled. The soft spot in the floor near the kitchen door creaked when she stepped around it. She was pouring Tyler's second coffee, leaning carefully across the table to reach his cup. Without disturbing the others, when she noticed the first cup was still almost full, she reached for it automatically to take it away to replace it with the fresh cup she was already pouring. Her fingers had barely touched the handle. "Don't touch my stuff." The words came fast and flat and ugly. She straightened immediately, startled, the fresh coffee pot still in her hand. "I'm sorry," she said. "I was just going to. I didn't ask you to take it." Tyler leaned back in the booth. His friends were already watching, already half smiling, the way people smiled when they sensed someone was about to be made an example of. "I didn't ask you to do anything. Is this how you people operate? Just grabbing things that don't belong to you? You people." Samantha felt it land somewhere in her chest, that phrase. She kept her voice even. She had gotten very good at keeping her voice even. "I apologize," she said. "I'll leave the cup. Can I get you anything else?" "Yeah," Tyler said, sitting up straighter now, playing to his audience the way he always had, the way that had always worked before. "You can explain to me why it takes 20 minutes to get a milkshake in a place this small?" The kitchen was backed up. "I'm sorry about the wait." "The kitchen was backed up," he repeated, mimicking her. One of his friends snorted. "Right, okay, that's very professional, very impressive. I can see you've really mastered the art of bringing people cold coffee and late milkshakes." She didn't answer. She had learned through nights like this, through men like this, that answering only fed it. "Do you even know what you're doing here?" Tyler pressed. His voice had taken on that particular edge that certain people's voices took when they realized the target wasn't fighting back. It made them feel like they could go further. Like, is this seriously it? This is the big plan. "Tyler," one of his friends said, a little uncertain. "Come on, man." "No, I'm serious." Tyler's eyes were fixed on Samantha now. "Because I've been watching you run around this place for an hour, and you look like you're about to collapse. No offense, just, is this what you saw yourself doing when you were a kid, wiping tables in the middle of nowhere for tips?" Samantha's grip tightened on the coffee pot. Here was the thing about that question. Here was the brutal, specific cruelty of it. It wasn't entirely wrong. She hadn't seen herself here. She'd wanted to go to nursing school. She'd had plans, and then her mother had left, and her father's health had started declining, and the plans had quietly folded themselves up and gone somewhere. She couldn't reach them anymore. But she didn't say any of that. "I'll give you a few more minutes," she said, and started to turn. That was when Tyler reached across the table and grabbed his milkshake. She heard it before she understood what was happening. A sharp, wet sound, a gasp from somewhere behind her, then cold and sweet and everywhere, soaking through her hair, running down her face, dripping from her chin onto the collar of her uniform. The glass was back on the table. Tyler's hand was resting beside it casually. He hadn't thrown it exactly, more like he'd swung it deliberately with just enough force to send it all over her and still be able to claim it was an accident if he needed to. The diner had gone completely still. Samantha stood there. She didn't move for a moment. She couldn't. The cold was shocking, the way cold always was when it hit skin that wasn't prepared for it. She could feel it running into her ear. She could smell the sweetness of it. Chocolate, she thought distantly he'd ordered chocolate. And she could hear very faintly one of Tyler's friends starting to laugh. Then another. Then someone at another table made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but wasn't sympathy either. Someone's phone appeared. Then another. She could see the little screens glowing in her peripheral vision pointed at her. Nobody moved toward her. Nobody said a word in her direction. She reached up slowly and wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at the mess on the table, on the floor, on herself. She thought about her father at home, connected to a dialysis machine 3 times a week, waiting for a transplant that might not come. She thought about the rent that was due in 9 days. She thought about Millie, who trusted her to keep this job, and how she could not afford to make a scene. "I'll get someone to clean this up," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "No rush," Tyler said pleasantly, leaning back. "Take your time." She turned toward the kitchen. She had taken exactly 3 steps. The sound that stopped her wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply the specific weighted sound of a large man rising from a booth, the slow creak of vinyl, the particular silence that forms around someone when their physicality alone commands it. The booth near the back window. Jack Cole stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't knock anything over. He didn't do any of the things that people expected from a man who looked like him. He simply stood, finished his coffee in one long, unhurried swallow, set the cup down carefully, and began walking toward Tyler's table. The diner, which had already been quiet, became something beyond quiet. It became the kind of silence that has weight to it, the kind you feel pressing against your eardrums. The truckers near the window stopped talking mid-sentence. The veteran at the counter put down his paper. The old couple in the corner looked up from their pie. Even Tyler's friends stopped laughing. One of them saw Jack first, saw the size of him, saw the patch on his vest, saw the expression on his face that was not anger exactly, but something older and quieter and far more serious than anger. And he straightened up immediately, some animal instinct cutting clean through the bravado. Jack stopped at the edge of Tyler's own table. He looked at the milkshake running down the floor. He looked at Samantha, still holding the empty coffee pot, her uniform soaked through. He looked at Tyler, and then he asked his question. You think humiliating a woman makes you powerful? Tyler blinked. The question had landed in a way he hadn't expected, without accusation in the tone, without heat. Just a direct, simple inquiry, as if Jack genuinely wanted to understand the answer. Excuse me, Tyler said. I asked you a question. Jack's voice hadn't risen. Do you think what you just did makes you powerful? Tyler looked at his friends. The muscle memory of a lifetime spent never being challenged kicked in. He smirked. I don't know who you think you are, but this doesn't involve you, man. It does now, Jack said. Look, it was an accident, okay? It wasn't an accident, Jack said. Simple. Final. The way you said something when you'd already decided you weren't going to argue about whether it was true. Tyler's jaw tightened. Something shifted in his face, the first flicker of something that wasn't quite confidence. He was used to being the biggest presence in any room. He was used to people reading his money, his family name, his attitude, and recalibrating their own behavior accordingly. This man was not recalibrating. I think you should go back to your seat, Tyler said. Jack didn't move. I think, Jack said slowly, that you're going to apologize to her. The silence stretched. Somewhere behind the counter, Samantha's coworker, a 19-year-old named Dara, who'd been working at Millie's for 3 months and who hadn't made a sound since the milkshake hit, was gripping the edge of the counter with both hands, watching. Samantha herself had turned her back around. She was watching Jack. She was watching Tyler. She was watching the two of them occupy the same small patch of linoleum in a diner in the middle of Arizona while the whole room held its breath. Jack, she said. She didn't know his name, but she'd heard the other waitress use it once weeks ago. She used it now. Please, I'm fine. I don't want any trouble. He didn't look at her when he answered. He kept his eyes on Tyler. I know you don't, he said. That's not the point. The point, Tyler said, his voice getting louder now, that particular escalation of someone who realizes the room isn't reacting the way he needs it to, is that you need to mind your own business before this becomes something you regret. Son, Jack said, and the word wasn't condescending, wasn't mocking. It was just the word of a man who'd lived long enough to watch boys like Tyler get swallowed by their own certainty. I've been in places that would have broken you in your first hour. I've buried friends. I've held men's hands while they died. I have done things and been through things and come out the other side with a real clear picture of what matters and what doesn't. And whether you believe this or not, what you just did to that woman matters. Tyler stared at him. His friends were very still. Now I'm going to ask you one more time, Jack said, and I want you to think about it before you answer. I'm not asking because I'm threatening you. I'm asking because I genuinely believe you have the capacity to understand that what you did was wrong. I'm asking because I'd like to think that somewhere under all that performance you've been putting on tonight, there's a person in there capable of a real apology. He paused. Are you going to apologize to her? The diner waited. Tyler looked at Samantha, really looked at her, maybe for the first time. The milkshake drying in her hair, the uniform soaked through, the exhaustion on her face that went deeper than one bad shift, the way she was standing with her shoulders slightly forward, not defiant, just braced, the way people stood when they'd been knocked down enough times to start anticipating the next blow. Something moved across Tyler's face. But then one of his friends made a sound half laugh, half disbelief, and Tyler's expression locked back up. "I don't think so," he said. Jack nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, and then Jack did something nobody in that diner expected. He walked to the counter calmly and asked Dara for a clean towel. Dara handed it over without a word, her hands shaking slightly. Jack walked back to Samantha and held it out to her. Not putting it on, her not making a gesture of it, just offering it the way you offered someone something they needed without making them feel small for needing it. Samantha took it. Their eyes met for a moment. "You don't have to shrink yourself for people like that," he said quietly. Only she could hear it. "You never did." She held the towel. She didn't know what to say. Her throat had gone tight in a way that had nothing to do with the humiliation and everything to do with the unexpected weight of being seen by a stranger when you'd spent months feeling invisible. She nodded. Jack turned back to Tyler's table. "You're going to pay your bill," Jack said, his voice back to carrying across the room. "You are going to leave a decent tip because she worked hard tonight and she deserves it. And then you're going to leave." "And if I don't," Tyler said. His voice had a harder edge now, the edge of a boy who'd cornered himself and didn't know how to back down with an audience watching. "Then we'll keep talking," Jack said. "We have time." The stillness in the diner had evolved into something different now. Something was shifting. The truckers near the window were sitting differently, less slumped, more upright. The veteran at the counter had put down his paper entirely. The old couple was watching Jack with the kind of careful, weighted attention of people who recognize something they hadn't seen in a while. One of Tyler's friends leaned in and said something to him. Tyler shook his head. His friend said something again, lower, more urgent. Tyler's jaw worked. He reached into his pocket and dropped 3 20s on the table. More than the bill. He stood up. He said something under his breath that nobody quite caught. His friends gathered themselves and followed him, the earlier bravado replaced by the specific quiet of people who'd been in a room where the social gravity shifted and didn't shift back. Tyler stopped at the door. He turned around. For a moment, just a moment, he looked at Samantha again. The expression on his face was complicated in a way that expressions in that kind of face weren't supposed to be complicated. He looked like he wanted to say something, like there was a sentence forming that he wasn't sure he had permission to say. Then he pushed through the door and was gone. The diner exhaled. People began moving again, carefully, tentatively, the way you moved after something had passed through a room and you weren't entirely sure it was over. The truckers exchanged looks. The veteran turned back to his paper, then put it down again. Dara had come out from behind the counter and was standing a few feet from Samantha, uncertain what to do with her hands. Samantha was still holding the towel Jack had given her. She looked at him. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. "I could lose my job if—" "You won't," he said. "He's gone." She looked at the table where Tyler and his friends had been sitting. The $60 was still there. The remnants of the milkshake on the floor and on her uniform were still there. But the people were gone, and the particular electric nastiness that had animated the air around them was gone with them. She let out a breath she'd been holding so long it had become part of her posture. "Why?" she said. It was all she could manage in that moment. Just a single word. "Why did you stand up? Why did you say anything? Why did it matter to you when it didn't matter to anyone else in this room?" Jack looked at her for a moment. Something passed through his expression, not grief exactly, but the echo of it, the settled permanent shape that grief left behind in a face when it had lived there long enough. "Because someone should have," he said. He left the tip he'd already been planning to leave more than generous, because that was how he was, though. She didn't know that yet, and he walked back to his booth near the back window and sat down. He picked up his coffee. He watched the room return to itself, slow and tentative, the way a room always did after something real had happened in it. Across the diner, Samantha stood with a clean towel in her hand, her uniform still wet, her hair still smelling faintly of chocolate milkshake. But something in her face had changed. She looked less braced, less like someone waiting for the next blow. She looked for the first time in a long time like someone who had just been reminded by a stranger in a faded leather vest in a diner off Route 89 that she was worth defending. She didn't know yet what was coming. She didn't know about the phone that had been recording. She didn't know that in less than 14 hours her face would be on screens across the country. She didn't know that Tyler Vaughn's name would become shorthand for something ugly, or that Jack Cole's silence and steadiness would be replayed and studied and argued about by millions of people who would never set foot in Flagstaff. She didn't know any of that. She just knew that her shift was almost over. Her father was at home waiting on a machine to keep him alive, and a stranger had stood up for her when nobody else would. She tucked the towel under her arm. She picked up her coffee pot, and she went back to work. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. Samantha didn't sleep that night. She told herself it was the coffee. She'd had too much, the way she always did on double shifts, drinking it more out of habit than need by the end. She told herself it was the adrenaline still working its way out of her system. She told herself a lot of things, lying on top of her covers at 2 a.m, still smelling faintly of chocolate despite the shower, staring at a water stain on the ceiling she'd memorized 6 months ago. But the truth was simpler and harder than any of that. She kept replaying it, not the milkshake, not Tyler's voice or the laughter or the phones pointing at her like accusations. She kept replaying the moment Jack held out that towel, the way he didn't make a production of it, the way he just offered it. Like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Like she was a person who deserved clean things when she'd been made dirty by someone else's cruelty. You don't have to shrink yourself for people like that. You never did. She turned onto her side. Down the hall, she could hear her father's breathing, the particular rhythm of it, slower than normal, heavier the way it got when his body was working harder than it should have been to do the things bodies were supposed to do automatically. She'd learned to sleep through it. She'd learned to listen for the change in it, the way mothers learn to hear the difference between a baby's ordinary cry and something worse. Her phone was on the nightstand. She'd ignored it since she got home. There had been a few texts from Dara. "Are you okay?" "Sam, seriously, that was insane. Call me." And one from Millie herself, which almost never happened, which meant Millie had already heard. She'd read those and put the phone face down and tried to sleep. At 2:14 in the morning, it buzzed again. She ignored it. At 2:17, it buzzed 4 times in rapid succession. She picked it up. The first text was from a number she didn't recognize. "Is this the waitress from the video?" The second was from her cousin in Phoenix, who she hadn't spoken to in 8 months. "Sam, is this you? Call me." The third was from another number she didn't recognize. The fourth was Dara again. "Sam, please check your phone. The video has like 40,000 views already." Samantha sat up. She opened the app. It took her 3 minutes to find it because she wasn't looking for it correctly. She was searching her own name and her name wasn't in the title. The title, when she finally found it, was simple and brutal. "Rich kid throws milkshake on waitress at Arizona diner." Biker's response goes viral. 44,000 views. She watched herself on a stranger's phone screen. She watched the milkshake hit. She watched herself go still. She watched Jack stand up, and even through the shaky camera angle, even compressed and small on her cracked phone screen, something about the way he moved made her chest tighten. He was so unhurried, so completely, almost impossibly calm. She watched him hold out the towel. She had to set the phone down after that. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and breathed through something that wasn't quite crying and wasn't quite anything else she had a name for. By morning, it was 400,000. She found out at 6:15 when Millie called. "I need you to come in early," Millie said, and her voice had the specific texture of someone who had already been awake for several hours, dealing with something she hadn't expected and didn't entirely know how to manage. "Not for the shift, just to talk. Can you do that?" "What's happening?" Samantha said. "The parking lot has 2 news vans in it," Millie said. "That's what's happening." She went in. She borrowed her neighbor's car because the bus wouldn't get her there fast enough. She drove with her hands tight on the wheel and the radio off because she couldn't handle sound right now, not until she understood what she was walking into. Millie met her at the back door, 63 years old, built like someone who'd spent 40 years on her feet and didn't regret a single day of it. Millie had the kind of face that had stopped pretending to hide what it felt a long time ago. Right now, it was showing concern and something that might have been protectiveness, and seeing it made Samantha's throat tighten in a way she hadn't expected. "Before you say anything," Millie started. "Am I in trouble?" Samantha said. "With me, no, absolutely not." Millie said it fast, the way she said things she needed the other person to hear clearly. "What happened last night wasn't your fault. Not 1 second of it. I want that to be the first thing out of my mouth. Samantha let out a breath. Okay, she said. Okay, what about the news people outside? They want a statement, they want your face, they want to talk to you and to Jack, and ideally to Tyler Vaughn, though I suspect Tyler Vaughn is going to be very hard to reach in the next few days. Millie paused. His family already called. Samantha went still. His family. A man who said he was Tyler's father's attorney, very polite, very measured. He said they were aware of the situation and they were looking into it and they hoped everyone involved could handle this privately. Millie's expression said exactly what she thought of that. I told him I ran a diner, not a private situation, and I'd be happy to pass along his number to anyone who wanted to call him. Despite everything, Samantha almost laughed. What do I do? She said. I can't tell you that, Millie said. That's yours to decide. But I'll tell you what I told that attorney. I'm not asking you to be quiet. Not for his family, not for anyone. You understand me? Samantha looked at her. I could still lose the job. If this gets too big, if it becomes a problem for the diner. Sam? Millie's voice was sharp in the way it got when she needed someone to stop and actually listen. You have worked double shifts for 11 months. You have never called in sick. You showed up the night of that ice storm in February when 2 other people didn't, and you drove yourself home at midnight on roads that had no business being driven on. You are not losing this job. Not over this. Samantha nodded. Her eyes stung. She blinked it back. Okay, she said. Okay. She didn't go out to the news vans. Not yet. She sat in Millie's office, a small room off the kitchen, crammed with invoices and one dying plant that Millie had been trying to keep alive for 6 years, and she looked at her phone. 800,000 views. The comments were coming so fast she couldn't follow them individually. They were just a river of text scrolling and scrolling. Some of them were about her. Some of them were about Tyler. But most of them, the ones that made her have to set the phone down again, were about Jack. That man walked over there like he'd been waiting his whole life for that moment. The way he gave her the towel without making it a whole thing, that's what got me. No drama, just here. This is what a real man looks like. Just so everyone knows. I've watched this 14 times and I still can't explain why I'm crying. She was still reading when Dara came in without knocking, pink-cheeked and slightly breathless, holding her own phone up like evidence. Sam? Oh my God. Sam, do you know who Jack Cole is? He's a regular, Samantha said. He comes in Thursdays usually. He's not just a regular, I looked him up. He's actually kind of legendary. Did you know he was a Marine 2 tours in Iraq? And he's been a Hell's Angel for like 20-something years, but he also does this charity work for veterans' families. There are whole articles about it, Sam. Dara stopped and seemed to realize she was spiraling. She took a breath. The point is, people are finding out who he is, and it's making the whole thing bigger. Like, a lot bigger. How much bigger? Samantha said carefully. Dara bit her lip. 1.2 million, she said. The silence in Millie's small office lasted approximately 4 seconds. As of right now, Samantha said. As of 8 minutes ago when I checked in the parking lot, Dara said. Samantha looked at the dying plant on Millie's shelf. She thought strangely about her father. About how this morning when she checked on him before leaving, he'd been sitting up in bed for the first time in 3 days, eating toast, looking a little more like himself. How he'd said, you look like something's on your mind. Sammy, and she'd said, just tired Dad, because she didn't know yet how to explain what was happening. Tyler's family sent a lawyer, Samantha said. Dara's expression shifted. Already. What are you going to do? Samantha looked down at her phone. At the video she'd watched 3 times, now watched herself be humiliated, watched herself go still, watched a stranger decide that her dignity was worth standing up for in a crowded diner when nobody else would. I don't know yet, she said. But something had changed in her voice when she said it. Something that Dara noticed that made Dara go quiet for a moment, studying her. Because the Samantha who had driven to Millie's that morning was the same Samantha who had learned to step around the soft spot in the floor, who had learned to keep her voice even, who had learned to let cruelty slide off her like water off a flat rock. And that Samantha was not gone exactly, but shifting. She was still sitting in Millie's office trying to understand what she was feeling when her phone rang. Unknown number, Arizona area code. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Is this Samantha Reed? The voice was male professional with the clipped precision of someone who talked on the phone for a living. My name is Richard Hale. I'm calling on behalf of the Vaughn family. I understand this is an unexpected call, and I want to start by saying that the family takes what happened very seriously. Samantha's hand tightened on the phone. Okay, she said. Mr. Vaughn Tyler's father is deeply embarrassed by his son's behavior. He wants you to know that, and he'd like to discuss what we might be able to do to make this situation more comfortable for you going forward. More comfortable. Samantha turned the phrase over in her head, looked at it from every angle. What does that mean, she said. There may be options available to you, Hale said carefully. Financial relief, given that I understand you're in a difficult personal situation with family medical expenses. The family is prepared to be generous. The only ask would be a simple request for privacy. Nothing dramatic, just an agreement to let this matter resolve quietly without further media involvement. Dara, who could hear the tinny voice coming through the phone from 3 feet away, had gone very still. Samantha said nothing for a moment. He threw a milkshake in my face, she said, in front of 40 people and a camera. Absolutely, Hale said, not missing a beat. And that was wrong. Tyler knows that. The family acknowledges that completely. This offer isn't about pretending otherwise. It's about how much, Samantha said. A beat. I'm sorry, you said generous. How much? Another beat longer this time, the sound of recalibration. The family is prepared to offer $75,000 in exchange for a confidentiality agreement regarding the incident and an agreement to refrain from media engagement going forward. $75,000. Samantha's father's dialysis cost $900 a week. A kidney transplant, if one became available, would cost more than she could currently calculate without her hands shaking. The rent was due in 9 days. Her car needed a brake job she'd been putting off for 3 months. $75,000. She closed her eyes. She thought about Jack's voice, because someone should have. 4 words. 4 words delivered with such quiet, settled certainty that they'd rearranged something inside her she hadn't known was crooked. She thought about all the comments she'd read. I've watched this 14 times and I still can't explain why I'm crying. All those people who recognized something in what happened, not just the cruelty, but the response to it. All those people who recognized that the real story wasn't the milkshake. She opened her eyes. No, she said. Hale paused. Miss Reed, I want to make sure you understand. I understand, Samantha said, and the answer is no. She hung up. Dara stared at her. Sam, she said carefully, that was 75 bomb. I know what it was, Samantha said. Your dad's medical bills. I know, Samantha said. Her voice was steady in a way it hadn't been the night before. Not the performed steadiness of someone keeping their voice even to survive a shift. Actual steadiness. The kind that comes from deciding something. She looked at Dara. If I take that money and go quiet, she said, then what happened last night just disappears. Tyler learns that money cleans everything up. And the next waitress he does this to has nobody. Not even a video. Dara looked at her for a long moment. Okay, Dara said quietly. Okay. What neither of them knew was that the call with Hale had lasted exactly 6 minutes and 40 seconds, and that someone in the parking lot, a reporter who'd been on his 3rd cup of bad coffee, waiting for anything to happen, had photographed Samantha through Millie's office window. Not her face, not the conversation. Just the image of a young woman in a diner uniform sitting in a small room, holding a phone, looking like someone in the middle of making a decision that was going to cost her something. That photograph, posted without context, would generate 300,000 more views by noon. But that wasn't even the thing that changed everything. The thing that changed everything was Jack. He'd seen the video. He didn't have social media himself. He'd never wanted it, never trusted it, never saw the point. But his brother had called him at 7 in the morning and said, Jack, you need to look at something, and he had looked. He'd watched himself from the outside for the first time, seen his own stillness through someone else's eyes, and what he'd felt watching it was complicated in ways he didn't have immediate words for. He'd called nobody. He'd made coffee. He'd sat with it. At 9:45, he'd gotten a call from a journalist at a national outlet. He didn't know how they'd gotten his number, but he wasn't surprised people found what they wanted to find. And the journalist had said, Mr. Cole, the whole country is talking about what you did last night. Would you be willing to share your perspective? And Jack had said, No, the journalist had pressed. Gently, professionally, but pressed. People are calling you a hero. How does that feel? Jack had been quiet for a moment. I sat in a diner, he said. I watched someone get humiliated. I stood up. That's not heroism. That's just what a person does. Another pause. Or it's supposed to be. He hung up. At 10:15, the video crossed 2 million views. At 10:40, Tyler Vaughn's name was trending nationally. At 11 o'clock, Samantha walked out of Millie's back office through the kitchen, past the soft spot in the floor near the kitchen door, and out into the dining room where 2 news vans were still parked, and 3 reporters were standing with coffee cups and cameras, and the patient practice readiness of people who made their living by catching the moment something tipped. She stood at the door for a second. She thought about the towel. She thought about you never had to shrink yourself. She pushed the door open and walked outside. She didn't have a statement prepared. She didn't have a lawyer standing next to her. She had a diner uniform and hair that was still slightly stiff from where the milkshake had dried before she'd showered, and she had the particular look on her face of someone who had decided somewhere in the middle of a sleepless night to stop calculating what she could afford to lose. The reporters moved toward her. She held up one hand. They stopped. I'm not going to give interviews right now, she said, her voice carried in the morning air. But I want to say one thing, just one thing, and then I'd appreciate some space. They waited. I've worked at this diner for 5 years, she said. I've been talked down to ignored, stiffed on tips, and treated like I was invisible more times than I can count. Last night was the first time someone stood up. Not just for me, for the idea that what happened to me was wrong. And it was a stranger, in a leather vest, who didn't have any reason in the world to get involved. She looked at the cameras. I don't know what happens next, she said. I don't have a plan. I didn't go to sleep last night thinking I was going to be part of a story. But I'm not going to go away quietly, not because I'm angry, because I think that silence, the silence of everyone in that diner, the silence this family is trying to buy from me with their lawyers and their money, that silence is the problem. It's always been the problem. She stopped. Nobody spoke. Then one reporter, the youngest one, a woman maybe 5 years older than Samantha, who'd been scribbling in a notebook, looked up and said very quietly, Ms. Reed, do you know where Jack Cole is now? Samantha shook her head, but she was looking at the parking lot, and there at the far end of it, she could see a motorcycle. Just parked quiet at the edge, far enough away to be uninvolved. Close enough to be present. She didn't point it out. She turned back toward the diner door. Behind her in the parking lot, the motorcycle sat still in the morning light, and the man on it watched her walk back inside with the particular expression of someone who has just seen something they were afraid they'd stop believing in. Not a hero, not a story, just a person standing up. He started the engine. He didn't leave yet. The motorcycle stayed in that parking lot for another 40 minutes after Samantha went back inside. Jack sat on it without moving. Engine idling low, watching nothing in particular. The reporters had gone back to their vans. Millie's had opened for the lunch rush. Normal things were happening in normal sequence the way they did, even when something abnormal had torn through the middle of everything the night before. He should have left. He knew that. He'd said what needed to be said, done what needed doing, and the smart move, the move that matched how he'd lived the last several years of his life, quietly away from attention. Putting one road behind him and finding the next one was to start the engine and go. He sat there anyway. There was a reason he'd been in Flagstaff, not passing through, not on a long run, actually there for the 3rd week in a row, staying at a motel 6 miles east of Millie's, eating at Millie's on Thursdays, because the meatloaf reminded him of something he couldn't name precisely and only feel. He had an appointment on Friday with a grief counselor named Dr. Paulette Morris, who worked out of a small practice near the university and who had been trying with patients that he found both irritating and quietly astonishing to help him put language around things he'd carried without language for 3 years. 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days to be exact. That was how long it had been since his daughter Katie had died. She'd been 22. She'd been working 2 jobs, a bakery in the mornings, a restaurant in the evenings, to pay for community college, because she wanted to be a physical therapist, and she was going to get there herself the way she'd always done everything on her own terms and her own timeline, and without asking anyone to carry it for her. She'd had his stubbornness and her mother's warmth and a laugh that could fill a room without effort. And one evening in a restaurant in Tucson, a table of drunk men had spent 2 hours making her life miserable, commenting on her body, grabbing her arm when she walked by, leaving a note instead of a tip that said things Jack could not make himself repeat, even in his own head 3 years later, without his hands going tight. She'd told her manager. The manager had told her to handle it professionally. She'd handled it professionally. She'd gone home that night and called her mother Jack, and her mother had been divorced for 8 years by then. But Katie had always been closer to her mother and said, "Mom, I'm so tired. I'm so tired of smiling when people treat me like I'm nothing." Her mother had said the things you said, that it wasn't true, that she was loved, that tomorrow would be different. 3 days later, Katie was gone. The official word was an accident. A car and night road, no other vehicles involved. Her mother believed it. Some part of Jack believed it too, because the alternative was something he couldn't fully hold without the whole architecture of himself threatening to come apart. But there was a note on her phone, not a note exactly, just a voice message she'd left herself, the way she sometimes did when she was processing something that her mother had played for Jack once, only once, and never again, because neither of them could survive it more than once. "I just want people to see me," Katie's voice said in that message. "Just once. Like actually see me. Not as someone to use or embarrass or walk past. Just as a person." Is that so much? That was the message that had brought Jack to Flagstaff. Not directly, not logically, but in the way that grief moved people sideways through indirection, following trails that only made sense when you look back at them. Dr. Morris had suggested 6 months ago that he find ways to be present in the world again, instead of just moving through it. He'd been trying. He'd been trying in the only way he knew how, which was to sit in diners and drink coffee and watch people and remind himself that the world wasn't entirely made of the thing that had taken Katie from it. And then last night had happened. He hadn't planned to stand up. That was what people didn't understand about moments like that. They weren't decisions exactly, not the way decisions usually felt, with deliberation and weighing and time. It was more like something recognized, like his body understood before his mind caught up that he had been in this room before, that he knew this girl, not her face or her name, but the specific weight she was carrying, and that the silence around her was the same silence that had wrapped itself around Katie in a restaurant in Tucson while a manager told her to handle it professionally. He wasn't going to sit in that silence again. He just wasn't. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. Dr. Morris texting, which she almost never did outside of appointment scheduling. "Jack, I've seen the video. I think we should talk before Friday. Can you come in today?" He stared at the text for a long moment. Then he typed back, "I'll be there at 2. He put the phone away. He looked at the front door of Millie's one more time. Then he pulled out of the parking lot and rode east into the ordinary brightness of an Arizona morning that had no idea it was ordinary. Inside Millie's, Samantha was not handling ordinary very well. The lunch rush had come in, and it was different from every other lunch rush. She'd worked different in a way that was hard to quantify but impossible to ignore. People were looking at her, not in the way that Tyler had looked at her through her past, her treating her visibility as an inconvenience. They were looking at her the way you looked at someone you recognized from somewhere, trying to place the face. A couple of them said things quietly to her before she could move away. Small things, the kind of things people said when they wanted to communicate something and only had a second to do it. "You handled that really well last night." From a woman in her 50s who'd ordered the soup and was paying in exact change. "My daughter texted me the video this morning," said a trucker at the counter, not looking up from his coffee. "Said to tell whoever that waitress is that she's got guts." A pause. "So, you've got guts." Samantha thanked them and kept moving. She didn't know what else to do. She'd never been good at receiving things, compliments, help, acknowledgement, without immediately trying to deflect them or minimize them or redirect the attention somewhere else. It was a habit so old she didn't remember forming it. At 12:40, a man came in alone and sat in the booth near the back window. Not Jack's booth specifically, a different one, 2 down from it, but close enough that Samantha's attention caught on him when she went to take his order. He was around 40 in a button-down shirt and slacks, with the look of someone who'd driven from somewhere and had a purpose in being here. He ordered coffee and a sandwich. He had a business card in his front pocket that he turned over in his fingers while he waited the way people did when they were deciding whether to use it. She brought his coffee. He smiled. "Ms. Reed," he said. She stopped. "I'm sorry," he said, immediately reading her face. "I'm not press. My name is Daniel Cho. I'm an attorney. employment and civil rights, mostly workplace discrimination and abuse cases. He placed the card on the table, not pushing it toward her, just placing it. I'm not here to pressure you into anything. I drove up from Phoenix this morning because I watched that video last night and I wanted to offer you some information. That's all. You can throw the card away when I leave. Samantha looked at the card. She looked at him. What kind of information? She said. The kind that tells you that what happened to you last night has a legal name, he said. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Assault in some interpretations depending on the state statutes. The kind that tells you that the confidentiality agreement the Vaughn family tried to buy you into this morning, yes, I know about that, it's already been reported, is designed specifically to protect them. Not you, he paused. The kind that tells you that you have more options than you probably think you do. Samantha pulled out her order pad, old habit, something to do with her hands. I can't afford an attorney, she said. Contingency, he said. I work on contingency for cases like this. You don't pay unless there's a settlement or judgment. Another pause, quieter. Ms. Reed, I have 3 daughters. 2 of them work service jobs to get through school. I've watched that video 4 times. I drove 2 hours because I didn't want you to spend the next week thinking your only options were silence or fighting alone. She looked at him for a long moment. Let me think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking, he said. She put a sandwich in and went back to work and tried not to think about the card sitting on the table in the booth near the back. She failed mostly. It sat in her peripheral vision for the next 20 minutes while she refilled coffees and ran food and stepped around the soft spot near the kitchen door. At 1:15, her phone buzzed in her apron. She pulled it out during a quick stop near the counter. Text from a number she didn't know. She almost didn't read it. She read it. This is Tyler Vaughn. I got your number from someone at the diner. I know you probably don't want it to hear from me. I don't blame you. I just want to say one thing if you'll let me. She stared at the screen. Dara appeared at her elbow, reading over her shoulder with the complete lack of personal space boundaries that Samantha had given up trying to address months ago. Dara made a sharp sound. Don't answer that, Dara said. I haven't done anything yet, Samantha said. He got your number from someone at the diner, Sam. That's already weird. That's already a problem. I know, Samantha said. She put the phone back in her apron. She delivered 2 plates to table 7. She refilled the veteran's coffee. He was back, same stool, same paper, though he watched her now with the quiet attentiveness of someone who'd decided she was worth watching over. She took a to-go order. She went back to the counter. She pulled the phone out again. She typed, "What do you want to say?" She hit send before she could talk herself out of it. The response came in less than a minute. I've been watching the video all morning. I can't stop watching it. Not the part with the biker. The part right after, the way you just stood there and then went back to work. I don't know why, but I can't get that out of my head. I just wanted you to know that I know what I did was wrong. Not because my dad's lawyers told me to say that, because I watched your face and I understood something I should have understood last night. Samantha read it twice. What does it say? Dara asked. Samantha showed her. Dara read it. Her expression went through several phases in rapid succession. Okay, Dara said. That's something. Yeah, Samantha said. Are you going to write back? Samantha thought about Daniel Cho's card on the table in the back booth. She thought about the $75,000 she'd turned down that morning. She thought about Jack standing up in this room last night without raising his voice, without making it about himself, without needing anything from the moment except the moment itself. She typed, "Then come and say it to my face." She hit send. She put the phone away. Her heart was hammering in a way she chose not to examine too carefully. 3 minutes passed. 4. At minute 6, the response came. Okay. When? She hadn't expected that. She'd expected silence or anger or a retraction, some retreat into the defensiveness that money provided the fortresses his family had been trying to build around him since last night. She'd expected him to behave the way people in his position behaved, which was to use their resources to make the problem smaller until it disappeared. She hadn't expected okay. She stared at the word on her screen for long enough that Dara said her name twice. What? Samantha said. Your 215 is here, Dara said, nodding toward the door. Samantha looked up. It was not a customer. It was a woman mid-40s, sharp eyes, a recorder in her hand, and a press badge clipped into her jacket, and behind her setting up equipment near the door with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, was a camera operator, not local news. The badge said national. Dara made a low sound. Sam, I see it, Samantha said. The reporter, caught her eye across the diner and smiled. Not predatory, careful. The kind of smile that said, I know what this is and I know what you're weighing and I'm not going to push. Ms. Reed, she said from across the room, not coming closer without invitation. My name is Carol Weston. I've been covering workplace abuse and class discrimination for 11 years. I drove up from Phoenix this morning. A pause. You've probably had a lot of people drive up from Phoenix this morning. You're the second, Samantha said. Carol Weston nodded. I'd like to tell your story if you'll let me. Not just last night, the whole story. Who you are, why you're here, what it costs to be you in a place like this. She paused. The Vaughn family has already issued a statement. Their attorney went on record an hour ago saying Tyler is deeply remorseful and the family is committed to making this right privately. I think people should hear your side before that narrative sets. The diner had gone quiet in the way it had gone quiet last night, that particular held breath quality that happened when something real was happening and everyone in the room understood it. Samantha looked around. The veteran at the counter, the woman who'd paid an exact change and said she'd handled it well. Two truckers who'd been in the middle of an argument about a football game and had stopped mid-argument to watch. She thought about Tyler's text. Okay, when? She thought about Jack's voice. Silence protects cruelty. He hadn't said those words exactly, but that was what he'd meant. She understood it now in a way she hadn't even 12 hours ago, because 12 hours ago she'd still been calculating what she could afford to lose, and the calculation had been so deeply habitual that she hadn't recognized it for what it was. The same silence, wearing different clothes. She looked at Carol Weston. Can I make a call first? She said. Of course, Carol said. Samantha went to the back. She picked up Daniel Cho's card. She dialed. He answered on the second ring. I'm going to talk to a journalist, she said. A national one, Carol Weston. A brief pause. Weston's credible, he said. Good track record. Before you do, has the Vaughn family made any further contact since this morning? Tyler texted me personally, she said. I asked him to come talk to me in person. He said okay. The silence on the other end of the phone was the silence of a man recalibrating very quickly. Sam, he said, and the fact that he'd shifted to her first name told her he understood the weight of what she just said. If Tyler Vaughn comes to that diner, you need me there. Not to make it adversarial, to make sure you're protected. Whatever he says, whatever he offers, whatever emotional direction this goes, you need someone in your corner who isn't going to be moved by the moment. Okay, she said. I'll be there in 90 minutes, he said. Don't talk to him until I get there. She hung up. She stood in Millie's back hallway for a moment, the phone in her hand, listening to the sounds of the diner around her, orders being called, the bell, above the door, the ceiling fan, the particular creak of the floor near the kitchen. All of it familiar. All of it the same as it had been yesterday. And yet she was standing in it differently. She went back out. She walked to where Carol Weston was waiting. Camera operator, still hovering at a respectful distance, recorder lowered, nobody pushing. Okay, Samantha said, but we do it here at the counter in the middle of everything. She looked around the diner. Because this is where it happened, and I think that matters. Carol Weston looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who had interviewed a great many people and had learned to recognize when they'd stopped performing and started telling the truth. Absolutely, she said, and the camera began to roll. None of them knew yet that Tyler Vaughn had already left Phoenix, that he was in a car driving north on I-17 without his father's lawyers and without his friends, just driving the way you drove when something had cracked open in you and the closed-in feeling of staying put had become unbearable. None of them knew that Jack Cole, sitting in Dr. Paulette Morris's office at 2 o'clock, was going to say his daughter's name out loud for the first time in 6 months. That he was going to say it and then sit with the weight of it and then say it again the way you practice saying a word in a foreign language until it stopped being foreign. Katie, her name was Katie. And none of them knew that in a courtroom 200 miles away, a clerk was beginning to process the first of what would eventually become several formal complaints against Tyler Vaughn, filed not by Samantha, not yet, but by 3 other women. Women from other towns, Other diners, other nights. Women who had watched the video and felt something they had carried quietly for years suddenly acquire the shape of a story they were allowed to tell. The camera rolled. Samantha put her hands flat on the counter the way she did when she needed to feel something solid, and she began to speak. The camera had been rolling for exactly 22 minutes when the bell above Millie's front door rang, and Tyler Vaughn walked in. Nobody had expected him this fast. Daniel Cho was still 40 minutes out. Carol Weston's camera operator swung around instinctively. Samantha's hands flat on the counter went very still. Tyler looked different from the night before. Not smaller exactly, but less assembled. He was wearing a plain gray shirt, no logos, the kind of thing you grabbed when you weren't thinking about being seen. His hair wasn't done. His eyes had the specific redness of someone who hadn't slept and had spent portions of the night crying, which was not a thing Samantha had imagined Tyler Vaughn capable of when she'd watched him throw that milkshake. He stopped just inside the door. He saw the camera. Something moved across his face, not the performed discomfort of someone managing optics, but actual unguarded alarm. "I didn't know there'd be," he started. "Then you should have called ahead," Samantha said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He looked at her. His jaw worked. He looked at the camera again. Then he did something that shifted the temperature of the entire room. He looked directly into the lens and said, "Okay, fine, leave it running. I don't care anymore." Carol Weston made a small sound that wasn't quite a word. Her camera operator kept rolling. Tyler walked to the counter. He didn't sit. He stood across from Samantha with the counter between them, which felt right, felt like the appropriate amount of distance for two people in this specific situation. And he put both hands on the edge of the counter, the way she'd put her hands on it 20 minutes ago. And he said, without preamble, without a lawyer's careful framing, without anything except the raw, ugly honesty of someone who'd spent a sleepless night arriving at a place he hadn't wanted to go. "I was showing off. That's it. That's all it was. There were 4 people watching me, and I wanted them to think I was, I don't know, powerful, above things." He stopped. "I've been doing that my whole life, using whatever was in front of me to perform for whoever was watching. And last night, what was in front of me was you." The diner was so quiet that the ceiling fan was the loudest thing in the room. Samantha didn't move. "That's not an apology," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm getting there. I needed you to understand that it wasn't personal, which I know makes it worse, not better, because it means I did what I did to you, and you were just," he stopped again. His voice had done something it apparently wasn't used to doing, cracked in the middle of a sentence in front of strangers. He pressed through it. "You were just a person doing your job, and I treated you like you were a prop in something I was performing." Samantha looked at him for a long time. "There were 40 people in this diner," she said, "and none of them said anything. Not one." She paused. "You want to know what that felt like? It felt like confirmation, like the universe agreeing with you. Like the silence was the world saying, 'Yeah, she doesn't matter, go ahead.'" Her voice was level, but her eyes were bright. "That silence is what I've been carrying since I was old enough to work a job. Every diner, every customer who talked to me like I was furniture. And nobody ever pushed back. Until last night." "The biker," Tyler said. "Jack," she said. "His name is Jack." Tyler nodded slowly. "I looked him up." A pause. "I know about his daughter." The air in the room changed. Samantha went still in a new way. "You know," she said. "I found articles. What happened to her? The restaurant in Tucson, the way she was treated." Tyler's voice had dropped. "And when I read that, I thought I could have been one of those guys. At that table in Tucson, I could have been exactly one of those guys." He swallowed. "And then I thought about what Jack must have felt sitting in this diner last night watching me. And I couldn't," he stopped. "I couldn't stay in Phoenix. I just got in the car." Samantha's throat was very tight. "Does he know that you know?" she said. "No," Tyler said. "I don't have any way to contact him." Carol Weston, who had been almost entirely still during this exchange, leaned slightly forward. "Mr. Vaughn," she said carefully, "are you saying that your behavior last night, in light of what you now know about Mr. Cole's history, changes the way you understand what happened?" Tyler looked at her. "It changes the way I understand what I did, yeah. It doesn't change that I did it." He looked back at Samantha. "I'm not here to make myself feel better. I'm here because you asked me to come, and because I owe you something that money can't actually cover. He reached into his pocket. Not for a phone, not for a wallet. He put a folded piece of paper on the counter. That's a personal letter, not from my father's lawyers, from me, from him. I wrote it this morning. It says exactly what I just said to you in writing with my name on it, and you can do whatever you want with it. Samantha looked at the paper. She didn't pick it up. My father is on dialysis, she said, 3 times a week. He's waiting for a transplant that might not come. I work double shifts because the bills don't stop, and the transplant list doesn't move, and the only thing between him and a really bad outcome is me showing up every day to this job and not making waves and not causing problems and not drawing attention to myself. She paused. Last night you gave me 2 options. Accept what you did and keep my head down or make noise and risk everything. Your family's attorney called me this morning and tried to make that a financial transaction. $75,000 to disappear. Tyler closed his eyes briefly. I didn't know the amount. But you knew they called. A beat. Yeah, he said, I knew. And you let them. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. I turned it down, Samantha said. And I need you to understand why, because I think you came here actually wanting to understand something. So I'm going to tell you. She straightened. I turned it down because there are women who came before me who got silenced the same way, with money or threats or just the weight of what they stood to lose. And because of that silence, you walked into this diner last night still believing you could do what you did without consequence. The silence didn't protect me. The silence created you. The room was absolutely motionless. Tyler opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked like someone being shown an X-ray of something they'd broken without knowing they'd broken it. Then from the back of the diner, a voice said, "She's right." Everyone turned. The veteran at the counter had swiveled on his stool. He was looking at Tyler with the flat, evaluating look of a man who'd spent decades reading other men under pressure. I've been coming in here for 6 years, he said. I've watched a lot of people treat the staff in this place like they were wallpaper. Never said anything. He paused. Should have. Every time. He looked at Samantha. I'm sorry I didn't say anything last night. That's on me. Samantha blinked. You don't have to. Yeah, I do, he said. Simple. Final. The woman who'd paid an exact change was still at her table. She raised her hand slightly like a student in a classroom, the gesture almost shy. Me too, she said. I watched it happen and I looked at my phone. I'm not proud of that. One of the truckers from the window table shifted in his seat. I've been in enough situations where I should have said something and didn't. He said to nobody in particular and everybody at once. It adds up. Not saying something adds up. Tyler Vaughn was watching this happen with the expression of someone who had come in expecting a confrontation and found instead something that didn't have a shape he recognized. Something more complicated than anger. More durable. The door opened. Daniel Cho walked in slightly out of breath, car keys still in his hand 14 minutes earlier than he'd estimated. He took in the room in 3 seconds, Tyler at the counter camera, rolling Samantha standing half the diner turned and watching, and he stopped. I see I missed some things, he said. A few, Samantha said. Daniel walked to the counter. He looked at Tyler. Tyler looked at him. Neither of them spoke for a moment, the professional evaluation of 2 people determining what the other represented. I'm her attorney, Daniel said. I don't have one here, Tyler said. Daniel studied him. I'm aware of that. A pause. For what it's worth, coming here without counsel was either very brave or very foolish, and I'm not yet sure which. Both probably, Tyler said. Despite everything. Despite all of it, the corner of Daniel's mouth moved. He turned to Samantha. Tell me where we are. She told him, concisely the way she'd learned to communicate during a busy shift when words were currency. Tyler's arrival, the letter, the conversation, the veteran, the diner pushing back in its small, quiet way. Daniel listened without interrupting, which she appreciated. When she finished, he said, There are 3 other women. The room shifted again. Samantha looked at him. What? 3 women contacted my office this morning after Weston's segment aired on the national feed. 2 from Arizona, 1 from Nevada. All service industry workers. All with incidents involving Tyler Vaughn in the past 14 months. He kept his voice even professional, but something underneath it was not entirely contained. Incidents that were reported to management and quietly resolved. one with an NDA already in place. The blood had left Tyler's face. I didn't, he started. You don't have to respond to that right now. Daniel said, not unkindly, but not gently either. But you should know it exists, and you should know that the quiet resolutions your family arranged are going to become significantly less quiet in the next 24 hours. Tyler put both hands on the counter and looked down. A long silence. The ceiling fan, the distant sound of the kitchen. Someone's coffee cup being set down. There's a girl in Nevada, Tyler said finally, his voice very low. Her name was Priya. She was a hostess. He stopped. I said things to her in front of her coworkers. I was drunk and I was showing off, and I said things that I've been. Another stop. Her manager called my dad's office. It went away. I told myself it went away because it wasn't that serious. He looked up. His eyes were red again. I've been telling myself that for 8 months. Carol Weston had gone very still behind her camera. Samantha was looking at Tyler with an expression that had moved past anger into something more complicated, not forgiveness, nothing close to forgiveness, but a kind of unwilling recognition. She was seeing him clearly for the first time, not as the villain her adrenaline had cast him in last night, but as something more disturbing, a person who had done serious harm while mostly succeeding at not looking at it directly. A person whose money had made that avoidance very easy. Until now. What do you want to do? She said. He looked at her. What? You heard me? She held his gaze. You came here without your lawyers. You knew about the other women. You've been sitting with what you did to Priya for 8 months. So I'm asking you directly, what do you actually want to do about it? A long silence. I want to fix it, he said. I don't know if I can, but I want to try. That's not a plan, Daniel said. I know, Tyler said. What does a plan look like? Daniel looked at Samantha first. She gave him the smallest nod. It starts with a public statement, Daniel said. Not from your family's PR team. From you. It acknowledges what happened here last night, and it acknowledges Priya and the other women by name with their permission. It doesn't ask for forgiveness. It doesn't position you as having learned something and grown. It's just an account. What you did. What it cost the people you did it to. He paused. Then it continues with your family dissolving the existing NDA with the Nevada woman at her request with no penalty. And it ends with whatever those women decide they want legally and otherwise without your family deploying resources to minimize it. Tyler's throat moved. Your father, Daniel said evenly, is not in this diner right now. Something shifted in Tyler's face. Something old and automatic that had been holding a particular shape for 23 years began in this moment, this specific Tuesday lunch hour, in a roadside diner off Route 89 to change its shape. Okay, Tyler said. It was the same word he'd texted that morning. 2 letters. But it meant something different now, carrying the weight of what the conversation had built it toward, freighted with a seriousness the earlier version hadn't had. Carol Weston lowered her recorder. Mr. Vaughn, she said quietly, would you be willing to go on record full interview? Everything you just said. Tyler looked at the camera. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I will. Nobody in the diner spoke. The veteran had turned back to his coffee, but he was very clearly still listening. The truckers hadn't moved. Dara was standing in the kitchen doorway with both hands over her mouth. Samantha looked at the folded letter still sitting on the counter between her and Tyler. She picked it up. She didn't open it. She held it in both hands for a moment, feeling its weight, which was not the weight of paper. One more thing, she said. Tyler looked at her. Jack Cole, she said. Whatever happens with the lawyers and the statements and the legal process, that man stood up for me when nobody else would. And he did it because of something that happened to his daughter that can never be fixed. She held Tyler's gaze. You're going to find him, and you're going to tell him what you told me, not for the cameras, not for the statement, just person to person. She paused. Can you do that? Tyler was quiet for a long moment. The question hung in the air of the diner above the coffee and the ceiling fan and the soft spot in the floor above all the ordinary things that had held steady while something extraordinary had rearranged itself around them. Yes, Tyler said, but finding Jack Cole was going to be harder than any of them knew. Because at that exact moment, Jack was sitting in Dr. Paulette Morris's office, with his hands on his knees and tears on his face for the first time in 3 years, saying his daughter's name into the air of a small, quiet room, and feeling something that had been frozen for a very long time begin very slowly to move. And when Jack Cole was ready to be found, he would not be where anyone expected him to be. He would be at a cemetery in Tucson, standing at a headstone with a single word on his lips that he'd been practicing all the way down I-17 with the desert wind against his face and the road unrolling ahead of him like something that finally had a direction. Katie. Just her name. Just the sound of it spoken out loud in the open air, where it could go somewhere instead of turning in circles inside him forever. Jack was already back on the road when his phone rang the fourth time. He'd been ignoring it since he left Tucson. 2 hours of desert highway, the kind of riding where the wind did the thinking for you, and you just let the road take whatever it wanted. He'd needed that. After the cemetery, after standing in front of Katie's headstone for 40 minutes, saying things he should have said 3 years ago, he needed the road the way other people needed silence. But the fourth call was from a number he recognized, his brother Carl. Carl never called 4 times in a row unless something was actually wrong, and Jack knew the difference between his brother's persistence and his brother's panic. He pulled over. He called back. "She wants to meet you," Carl said before Jack could get a word in. "The waitress, Samantha. Her attorney called someone who got to me. She's asking if you'll come back to Millie's." A pause. "And Jack, there's something else. Tyler Vaughn is there." The highway noise filled the silence. "He came back," Jack said. "Apparently he drove up from Phoenix this morning on his own. No lawyers. He talked to her on camera. The whole thing is already on Weston's national feed." Carl's voice had the particular quality it got when he was trying to stay neutral about something he had strong feelings about. People are saying might be the most honest thing they've ever seen a rich kid do on television. Which isn't saying a lot, but Jack, he's asking for you specifically. Samantha asked him to come find you, and he said he would. Jack looked at the road ahead of him. Empty straight, the kind of highway that offered you the option of just continuing. Keeping the wheels moving, letting the distance accumulate. Letting the whole mess of it shrink in the rearview mirror until it was small enough not to matter. He'd done that before. After Katie. He'd ridden for 6 weeks, just ridden putting states between himself and the thing he couldn't face. It hadn't worked. The thing had been waiting for him when he stopped. "Tell them I'll be there in 2 hours," he said. He hung up before Carl could respond. He sat on the bike on the shoulder of the highway and breathed through the next 30 seconds, which were the hardest 30 seconds, the ones where you decided whether you were going to do the thing you just said you'd do. Then he turned the bike around. The drive back was different from the drive out. Something had shifted in him at that cemetery, something that Dr. Morris had been quietly building toward for 6 months, without either of them being sure it would ever arrive. He'd stood at Katie's headstone, and he'd talked to her, actually talked, not the rehearsed internal monologue of grief, but real halting, honest conversation the way they'd had when she was alive. He'd told her about the diner. He'd told her about Samantha. He'd told her about standing up and what it had felt like and why he'd done it. And then he told her the thing he'd never been able to say, that he was sorry, not for anything he'd done. He'd never hurt Katie, never failed her in any concrete way he could identify, but sorry in the way you were sorry when someone you loved had been carrying something alone, and you hadn't known how heavy it was until it had already crushed them. Sorry for the world that had made her so tired. Sorry that he hadn't been at that restaurant in Tucson. Sorry that some stranger at a table had treated his daughter like she didn't matter on a night when she was already asking herself the same question. He'd said all of it in the open air, in the afternoon sun, and when he finished, something in his chest had released that had been locked for 3 years, 2 months and 11 days. He didn't feel better exactly. Grief wasn't something that got at her, but it felt different. It felt like something he was carrying instead of something that was carrying him. He rode back toward Flagstaff with that distinction held carefully in his hands, the way you held something fragile at speed. Millie's parking lot was fuller than it had ever been when he pulled in at 4:40. 2 news vans, several cars he didn't recognize, and what appeared to be a small group of people standing outside the entrance who weren't waiting to eat. He parked at the far end, the same spot he'd been in that morning, and sat for a moment. Through the window, he could see Samantha at the counter. She was talking to someone he didn't recognize, a man in a button-down who had the bearing of someone professional. Off to the side, Carol Weston was reviewing footage with her camera operator. And in the corner booth, not Jack's booth, a different one, Tyler Vaughn sat alone, hands around a coffee cup looking at the table. Jack watched Tyler for a moment through the window. He looked like someone who had been taken apart and hadn't yet figured out how to put himself back together. Jack knew that look. He'd worn it for most of 3 years. He got off the bike. When he walked in, the room did the thing it had done the night before, that specific gravitational hush that followed him in public spaces, the awareness of his size and his presence and the particular energy of a man who had lived a serious life. But this time it felt different, less like wariness and more like relief, almost. Like the room had been waiting for something to complete itself, and here was the piece it had been missing. Samantha saw him first. Her face did something complicated and immediate, the way faces did when the emotion was faster than the decision to show it. She came around the counter before he reached it. "You came back," she said. "You asked," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "I heard you went to Tucson." He didn't ask how she knew. Information moved fast now through the phone trees of people who cared about this story, which had apparently become a population larger than either of them had anticipated. "Yeah," he said. "Are you okay?" The question landed simply, without drama, the way she asked it. Not "how are you doing" in the performative way people asked it when they didn't want an answer. Actually wanting to know. "Getting there," he said, which was more honest than yes and more useful than the full truth. She nodded. She understood getting there. She'd been getting there herself for 11 months. "He's here," she said with a slight tilt of her head toward Tyler's corner booth. "He said he'd wait. I told him you might not come." "I almost didn't," Jack said. "But you did," she said. He looked at Tyler across the diner. Tyler had looked up when Jack walked in, and now they were looking at each other across the length of Millie's, and the distance between them felt like more than the 15 feet it actually was. It felt like the distance between two entirely different understandings of what the world owed people. "Give me a minute," Jack said to Samantha. She stepped back. She went to the counter, and she did not watch because some things needed to happen without an audience, even when there technically was one. Jack walked to Tyler's booth. He didn't sit. He stood at the edge of it, the same way he'd stood at Tyler's table the night before, and he looked at this 23-year-old kid who had done a stupid, cruel thing and then driven 2 hours to answer for it without being forced to. Tyler looked up at him. His eyes were swollen. He'd been crying again, or still, it was hard to tell. "I know about your daughter," Tyler said. No preamble, no easing into it. "I know what happened. I know what she went through before." He stopped. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't do anything. I know it doesn't fix a single thing. But I needed to say it to your face." Jack was quiet for a long moment. "What's her name?" he said. "Do you know her name?" Tyler blinked. "Katie," he said. "Katie Cole." Something moved through Jack's face. Not pain, or not only pain. Something else underneath it, the faint, unexpected warmth of hearing his daughter named by a stranger who had found her in an article and learned who she was and carried her name here. "Sit down," Tyler said. Jack sat. They were quiet for the moment, the two of them in a booth in a diner in Arizona, with the ceiling fan wobbling overhead, and the sound of the kitchen behind them, and the weight of everything that connected them in ways neither had chosen. "I've been thinking about what she said," Tyler said, "in that voice message. The one from the articles." Jack's jaw tightened. "That was private." "I know. I'm sorry it got out." Tyler held his gaze. "But I read it, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. I just want people to see me. That's what she said." His voice cracked on the last word. He pushed through it. "And I thought, how many times have I sat at a table in a restaurant and looked straight through the person serving me like they were a vending machine? How many times? My whole life." He shook his head slowly. "And I never thought about it once. Not once, until I watched your face last night when you stood up. And I understood that you were standing up for all of them, not just her." He nodded toward the counter where Samantha was. "All of them, every single person who'd ever been made invisible by someone like me." Jack looked at the table between them. "You can't undo it," Jack said. "That's the thing nobody wants to hear. You can decide to be different. You can make it right in every way that's still available to make right. But the things you did, those women carry those nights. They'll carry them for a long time." He looked up. "I'm not saying that to punish you. I'm saying it because I need you to understand that this doesn't end with a statement or a settlement or a conversation in a diner. It ends with what you do for the rest of your life." Tyler nodded. "I know. he said. I know that now. Do you? Yes, no hesitation, sir. The word came out without calculation, the automatic respect of someone who finally understood who they were talking to. Jack studied him for another long moment. He was looking for the performance, the managed sincerity of someone who'd been coached into contrition, and he was not finding it. What he was finding was messier and less polished and more real. A young man sitting in the rubble of his own certainties, without his father's lawyers, without his friends, without the money working as a buffer between him and consequence. It didn't fix anything. It didn't come close to fixing anything. But it was something. It was a beginning of something, and Jack was old enough to know that beginnings, however imperfect, were the only way anything ever changed. Priya, Jack said. Tyler looked at him. The woman in Nevada, her name is Priya. You say her name when you make that statement. Not a reference, not the other incident. Her name. Jack's voice was even and firm and left no room. And you find out what she needs. Not what your family's settlement can offer. What she actually needs. And you make it happen. Yes, Tyler said. And the other two women. Yes. Jack put his hands on the table. He looked at them for a moment, the tattoos, the scars, the hands of a man who'd built a life out of hard materials. I'm not going to tell you I forgive you, he said. That's not mine to give. What you did to Samantha, what you did to those other women, that forgiveness belongs to them, and they'll decide if and when and how much on their own timeline, not yours. He paused. But I'll tell you this. The fact that you're sitting here, that you came without being forced, that you looked me in the eye and said my daughter's name, that means something. Not enough, but something. Tyler nodded. His eyes were wet again. He wasn't trying to hide it anymore. Thank you, he said quietly, for last night, for standing up, even knowing what it would do to the attention, the cameras, all of it. You didn't want any of that. No, Jack said, I didn't. Why did you do it anyway? Jack thought about Katie, about Dr. Morris's office, about the voice message he had never been able to listen to more than once, about the specific silence that had surrounded his daughter in a restaurant in Tucson while a manager told her to handle it professionally. Because I've been sitting in silence for 3 years, he said, and silence doesn't protect anybody. It just gives cruelty somewhere comfortable to live. He said it simply the way you said something that had been working its way toward language for a very long time and had finally arrived. He stood up. Tyler stood too, instinctively. They looked at each other. Jack extended his hand. Tyler took it. They shook not the aggressive grip of men performing strength, but the solid, honest grip of two people who had arrived at the same small piece of ground from opposite directions and were acknowledging the distance traveled. Then Jack walked back to the counter where Samantha was waiting. She'd been watching, he knew. Everyone had in the careful, sideways way of people who understood that something private was happening in a public space and were trying to honor both facts at once. Now she looked at him directly. How do you feel? She said. Tired, he said. Good tired, but man, the kind that means something happened. She almost smiled. I know that kind. He ordered coffee. She poured it. For a moment, they were just two people in a diner doing the ordinary things, and the ordinariness of it felt like something earned. What happens now, he said, for you? Daniel, my attorney, thinks we have a strong case. The 3 other women are going to come forward. The NDA in Nevada is being dissolved. She wrapped both hands around the edge of the counter, that grounding gesture that had become her signature through all of it. Carol Weston wants to do a longer piece, not just about last night, about service workers, about what it costs, about what the silence costs. She paused. She asked if I'd be involved, like actually involved, helping to shape it, talking to other women. What did you say? I said I needed to talk to my dad first. She said it without self-consciousness, without the slight apology that used to color every mention of her father the way she'd always spoken about him before, as if his illness was an inconvenience she was inflicting on other people. He's the one this affects most. If I step into something big, into a public role, into a legal fight, his life gets complicated too. What do you think he'll say? Jack asked. She was quiet for a moment. I think he'll say go, she said. He's been saying go my whole life. I'm the one who kept finding reasons to stay small. She looked at Jack. You know what he said when I called him this morning? He said, Sammy, I raised you to take up space. Go take up some space. Something in Jack's expression softened. Smart man, he said. Stubborn, she said. But yeah. At 4:58, Carol Weston's segment aired nationally for the second time. The version that included Tyler's unguarded lawyerless conversation at the counter had already reached 6 million views. Comments were running in every direction. People who called Tyler's appearance a publicity stunt, people who called it the first honest thing they'd seen from someone his age in years, people who had nothing to say about Tyler at all and were only there to talk about Jack and Samantha, about what it looked like when someone decided that silence was no longer an option they were willing to choose. At 5:15, Samantha's phone rang. She looked at the number. She looked at Jack. "It's my dad," she said. "Go," he said. She went to the back. Jack drank his coffee. Behind him, Tyler had gotten up from his booth and was standing near the door, phone to his ear, in what appeared to be a difficult conversation with someone, his voice low, his posture set in the specific way of someone who had decided what they were going to do and was now defending that decision to someone who didn't like it. His father, probably. The walls finally meeting the thing that had always been coming. The veteran at the counter caught Jack's eye. He raised his coffee cup slightly, not a toast exactly, just an acknowledgement. One man to another, the specific language of people who didn't need many words. Jack raised his cup back. Dara came out of the kitchen at 5:20 with a plate she set in front of Jack without being asked. Meatloaf special. She hadn't taken his order. She just knew. "On the house," she said. Millie said. Jack looked at the plate. "Tell Millie thank you," he said. Samantha came back at 5:30. She slid behind the counter. Her eyes were bright, the particular brightness of someone who had just said something important and had it received. "He said go," she told Jack. "I know," Jack said. "He also said—" She stopped. She was almost smiling now, fully the smile of someone who had forgotten for a while that their face was capable of it. "He said to find out the biker's name and tell him thank you. He said any man who stands up for his daughter without being asked is the kind of man worth knowing." Jack was quiet for a moment. "Jack Cole," he said. "You can tell him Jack Cole." "He'll want to shake your hand someday," she said. "I'll be around," Jack said. He meant it in both senses. The literal one, he had another appointment with Dr. Morris on Friday, and after that he didn't have a plan, but plans had a way of forming when you stopped riding away from things and started riding toward them. And the larger one, the sense of being present in the world in a way he hadn't been for 3 years, of having his eyes open, of being the kind of person who noticed when someone needed a clean towel and offered it without making them feel small for needing it. He finished the meatloaf. He drank the coffee. He left a tip that made Dara's eyes go wide when she found it. At 6 o'clock, he stood up to leave. Samantha walked him to the door. The evening was coming in through the windows, the long golden light of Arizona that made everything look like it had been painted carefully. Behind them, the diner was filling up the regular dinner crowd, truckers and ranchers and families, none of whom had been there the night before, all of whom were sitting in a room that had been permanently changed by what had happened in it. "Same time next Thursday," Samantha said. He looked at her. "You'll still be here." "For a while," she said. "Millie needs me, and I think—" She paused, finding the words carefully. "I think I needed to remember that this place is worth fighting for. Not just the job, but the idea of it. That regular people deserve to come somewhere and be treated right. That the people serving them deserve the same." She lifted one shoulder. "I'm not done here yet." He nodded. "Meatloaf's good," he said. "It really is," she agreed. He pushed through the door. He walked to his bike at the far end of the parking lot. He put on his helmet. He did not look back. Not because he was done. He wasn't. None of them were, but because looking back was the old habit, the one that kept you circling the same ground. He was pointed forward now, toward Friday's appointment with Dr. Morris, toward whatever came after that, toward a version of himself that was still under construction, but was finally, after 3 years, being built by someone who had decided to keep building. He started the engine. In her first public speech 3 months later, Samantha Reed would stand at a podium in Phoenix in front of 300 service workers and advocates and say the sentence that would be repeated for years afterward. "That night, a biker didn't save me. He reminded me I deserved to be saved." And in the back of the room against the wall, a large man in a faded leather vest would hear it and feel something settle in his chest, the way only true things settled. Tyler Vaughn would never fully escape what he had done, nor should he. But he would spend the next decade in the work of trying to deserve the chance he had been given in a diner where a stranger decided that silence was no longer acceptable. Priya would accept his call. She would not forgive him on his timeline, but she would eventually, on her own terms, find something for herself that was larger than what he had taken. And in a cemetery in Tucson, on a headstone that caught the evening sun in a particular way, a name waited in the quiet. Katie Cole, daughter, voice, reason. She had asked to be seen. And in the end, because of everything her father had been brave enough to feel and carry, and finally say out loud she was. That was the truth the cameras had caught, and the whole country had argued about, and the lawyers had tried to bury, and the silence had attempted to swallow. One voice in a crowded room choosing not to sit down. That was all it had ever taken. That was all it would ever take.